You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Sean Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision-making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision-making in your life and business.
So you're probably going to more weddings than I do at your age because all your friends are getting married and stuff. So I went to a wedding just recently. So tell me if this is normal. All right. So the father of the bride walks the bride up the aisle.
That's normal.
Normal, right? Normal. And then the officiant, the person who's doing the ceremony, will ask the father a question. What's that question?
Who like gives this woman away or whatever?
Right. Okay. So that's the way I'd always heard it. So here's what they did at this. So see if this is what you're hearing. It was, who supports this woman in her decision to get married?
Ah, that seems very modern.
I thought so.
Yeah.
And so my first reaction was, oh, that's very forward thinking and strong woman minded, and okay, all right. But then I started looking at it as a dad, and I kind of want that question asked differently, like who gives this woman away? Now, and I realize that people are going to look at that and go, well, that's the patriarchy holding the women down, and I'm not seeing it that way. I'm seeing it as there is a real change in responsibility, and there is an event that gets softened. There's an event of the father releasing that responsibility that you've raised this person their whole life. You've taught them, you're there to protect and provide and all of that. And you are giving away that responsibility.
Yeah, you no longer have you do not have the responsibility that you had before.
Yeah. And
so so what would you say to someone who goes, well, but she's an adult, she lives on her own, you don't have that responsibility?
That's where I came in, is that it is for the father. So
it's really all about you.
Yes.
Well, you know what's funny?
Yes, it's all about me. All right, so go ahead.
You know what's funny? You've had one daughter get married. Nobody asked that question at her wedding.
Well,
because you were officiating the wedding. You didn't ask. Well, so there you go.
Yeah, all right.
Maybe you're just jealous because you got robbed of an experience.
Well, I didn't ask myself. I should have asked myself and then run around and play the role.
Yeah, it's me. Okay, great. Yeah.
So the other thing they did along the same lines.
Perfect.
All right, see how far this goes. Is at the end, all right, so you do your vows, all right, and they say to the groom now, all right, you're all done, you're married, I now pronounce you, and they say to the groom, what?
I now pronounce you husband and wife. Oh, you may kiss the bride.
You may kiss the bride.
Sure.
Okay. They didn't do that.
Okay. I don't have a guess in my head.
All right, they said you can kiss each other.
What?
Yeah.
Wow, this is a very
progressive.
Very progressive.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I had the same thing, is that there is this, that's a very different statement that you're making at the wedding, right?
It seems small, but it is different.
I think it's important to say, now you can kiss this person. Now you have now permission to do it. And it says something about what the standards ought to be before. And the importance of that. And I realize that I'm looking at this as, full of misogyny and patriarchy, but
yeah, you're a bigot.
I know.
But speaking of doing things differently,
all right,
our guest today is all about it. Matt Confer is the VP of Strategy at Ability. Ability provides learning simulations for business leaders so you can practice and receive real-time feedback on your leadership ability in a real-world like simulation. So it's so innovative, so new. Maybe they can come up with a new one for wedding officiants so they can try out language in the ceremony and see what works and what doesn't. But we learned a lot about Matt about Ability's work that they're doing to improve leadership across the board. And we had our own takeaways about how we can improve our own leadership, hopefully without going through a simulation. I think you're going to learn a lot. Hope you enjoy sticking around. I'm Sanger Smith with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. What's up, Matt?
Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, you too. It's funny experience on this podcast for us because sometimes we just manifest. We manifest meeting the perfect person. And a few weeks ago, we were talking. I said, if I wanted to make the best decision, what I would do is I would just try every single possible outcome, and then I would know what the best decision is. And then boom, there's Matt and Ability, and now I can just simulate all of my decisions. So
should work on manufacturing.
Yeah, I'm gonna start. So I was hoping you could talk to me about like winning lotto tickets or something. I don't know. And then next episode, I'll have a genie on here.
Hey, we were just down in your neck of the woods. Sanger and I were just down in Austin, just for the last couple of days. We were at a investment conference doing some due diligence on an investment firm. So we were down where you are. Have you ever been to Joe Rogan's The Comedy Mothership?
I have not. We've been here in Austin for 10 years. We used to live downtown. Now we live a little north of the city, so we have not made it there. But the whole area is just blowing up. It's been a wonderful spot to live.
There were you pointed it out, saying there were about 10 to 12 massive cranes in downtown just building it. It's booming like crazy.
Yeah, we feel like we were here a little bit early, but the growth since the last 5 or 6 years brought about by all the moves in 2020 have been nuts.
Yeah, it was packed at this comedy place. In fact,
on a Tuesday, man.
Tuesday night at 10 o'clock at night,
which was a great decision until Wednesday morning.
Yeah,
it seemed
exactly. Like a good decision.
It was really fun until Wednesday morning, and then it wasn't fun.
Yeah, it did seem like in hindsight, it was, looking back on it, it seemed like a bad decision. I have a question for you. Tell me if I'm wrong or not on this. That I think most people think they make better than average decisions or make good decisions, just like, most people think they're better than average drivers. Now, that can't be true. How do you get people to a point of self-awareness where they're able to reflect and realize they need some help in decision-making?
One of the things that we do is our attempts, because we train a lot of corporate leaders. So our simulations are used in Fortune 500 companies all around the world. And the thing that we do is we try to pull people out of their day job. And so we don't want our simulation to feel exactly like your day job feels like. So for one of our simulations, you're building a business from the ground up, but it's a made up industry. You're a made up company. And it's about focused on how do you operate as a team? How do you make decisions? We're not trying to put you in a simulation that looks exactly like your real world. And our theory and what kind of comes to pass is when you put people in an experience that isn't like their real world, their default behavior comes out because they have no way to just rest on their laurels of understanding the intricacies of the business. When they're thrust into something totally new, their default behavior comes out. And then when we do reflective pieces at the end of every round, they're able to look at it and say, man, I actually am pretty quick to shoot people down on my team when I think I'm right. And that's something that I want to work on as a leader. And that's really our core thesis is put people in a simulation, give them real world practice without real world consequences, and then talk to them about how they felt when a clock was ticking down and they didn't know the right thing to do.
What are you finding is the default decision-making framework most often before you really start working with them? What are people doing habitually?
People habitually usually go with some sort of, they want to find consensus, which I think is a really good thing. But what we find is the first person who talks, they tend to be the one that the path goes towards where they wanted it to go. There's kind of the default behavior is not to disagree. And I think part of that is probably because we operate mostly with, relatively large corporations. And so there's something to be said that those companies, you don't want to rock the boat. You want to kind of do what's worked. And so if somebody puts forward a thesis, the vast majority of people in some ways just kind of fall in line. And that tends to be what we find is teams that are really successful are teams that are try to challenge the constraints, try to break a little bit from the status quo. And our games are kind of built to try to push you towards that direction. How do you stretch your comfortable limits? How do you, in essence, think outside the box?
Yeah. So if you break up the inertia of the day to day, all of these habits that an individual leader may have kind of formed over many years of doing things over and over and over in the same direction, you can kind of like default back to how do you normally act? Or how would you naturally act, I guess is maybe a better way of putting it. And yeah, it seems to me, I think a lot of people don't really recognize the innate desire that we all have to avoid conflict. Even people, a lot of times leaders have arrived at a leadership position because they are more comfortable with conflict than the average person. But like still, as humans, we can't go through life all day long seeking out conflict. Like we have a desire to conform. You can see it in like the man on the street interviews, on YouTube, but people just go out there and say the silliest crap ever. And they're like, look what I got this idiot to agree to. It's like, yeah, I wouldn't have done much better. Like they're probably just thinking this guy's weird. I want to kind of move on. They're not wanting to conflict. But that desire to arrive at consensus, I see that hold a lot of leaders back because I think it comes from a good place.
Yeah, I think so too. One of our most popular simulations is focused all around people management. And the thing that we hear from clients is, we promoted this individual because they were a heck of an individual contributor. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a great manager. And then the problem is you put them into a managerial role and they innately assume that everybody wants to be managed like they would want to be managed. And so one of the things that we try to build in our management training is how do you understand what motivates the people on your team? And how do you actually become capable as a manager where you can adjust your approach based on the person that you're actually working with, understanding that we're all motivated by different things. So it is a lot of trying to break that innate sense of everybody just wants to be managed. I'm motivated by money. I'm motivated by prestige. I'm motivated by belonging. And so as a result, I manage to that. The better strategy is to actually try to understand what motivates the people on your team and adjust your managerial style.
So how do you best determine what people are motivated by?
Yeah, so in our game, the way that it's built is you manage 6 virtual avatars, and basically they're all mapped to some of the major personality profiles that exist. So your listeners might be familiar with Myers-Briggs or something like DISC or Hogan. These are very popular kind of personality profiles. And the characters in the game are all mapped to different personality profiles, but we don't tell you up front what those personality profiles are. But the game has a dynamic email engine where the characters at different points in the game send you an email. So you start to piece together that Jim on your team is a new college grad who thinks he's ready for the C-suite. So he is motivated by being on high visibility tasks. And you have another character who's a boomerang employee. She was with your company, she went to another company, and now she's back at your company. And so she's looking for belonging. She wants to reintegrate herself with the company. So she's looking for really collaborative tasks. And a lot of what we do is we try to build in role plays, which we use generative AI for it now, where you get to talk one-on-one with these characters and you start to figure out what motivates them and hopefully adjust your managerial style appropriately. I always talk about, I started my career at Deloitte. I spent the first 10 years in a somewhat traditional consulting role. And at some point, 4 or 5 years in, I got thrust into a managerial role and I was petrified. I was like, I have people's actual careers in my hand and I have no idea how to manage them. And they did a pretty good job of training you and giving you those types of tools. But I think I defaulted to the fact that, these people must be motivated by the same reasons that I came to Deloitte, or they must be motivated by the same things. And I adjusted my managerial style basically like I was managing just 5 of me. And as I started to get better, I started to understand that everybody's motivated by different things and you have to be capable as a manager to adjust based on who you're actually managing in that moment.
And how often do people actually know what they are motivated by themselves?
It's a wonderful point. The first part of our managerial activity, it's about a 6 to 8 hour simulation. One of the first activities you do is we actually do a motivator exercise for each individual. And you have to stay, am I motivated by collaboration? Am I motivated by prestige? Am I motivated by money or status? What actually motivates me? What makes me excited to come to work? We all have to work. I don't think we're not trying to pitch this as this is just this Goldilocks, wonderful rainbows and sunshine. Like, work isn't about that, but we all are motivated by something when we come to work. And so our first step, and you're exactly right, is to actually look inward and say, what motivates me? Then you start to learn these 6 characters, what motivates them. And the final activity is, okay, we've spent all these time with this fictitious characters. What actually motivates the people on your team? You manage 3 people, you manage 6 people, you manage 30 people. What do you think manages them or motivates them? And how can you adjust your managerial style appropriately?
So how would I break through finding the true motivation as opposed to what somebody says their motivation is? Because if I'm working at a big company, I'm going to say my motivation is to see my boss succeed and do the best.
Yeah, it seems like the further away from benevolence a true motivation is, the less likely someone's going to be honest about it, even with themselves. I want to do a good job to, save puppies and help the poor. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. I want to do a good job for prestige and status. Well, that might be my motivation, but I don't want to say that out loud.
I think part of it is effective management in some ways is about bringing the receipts and being present. We talk a lot about how it's hard in the day-to-day world to get away from the constant barrage of notifications. So one of the things that all of our games does is they have a dynamic inbox. And part of what we do is we send messages to you throughout the game. So all of our rounds are timed. And during each of the rounds, you're receiving messages. And your little notification box in the top left-hand corner is popping up with notifications. You need to read an email from somebody on your team. You need to respond to somebody. And the goal of what we're trying to teach is when you then actually go into a managerial conversation, you need to be present. You need to turn your brain off from everything else that's going on and actually talk to the individual. And what I mean by bring receipts is, yes, everybody will come in and say, I want to save the puppies and I want to do good and I want to do all of those things. But if you bring an email and say, hey, you wrote this email to a client and it came across this way, and you're telling me that this is what you're motivated by, but I actually don't think that's what you're motivated by. I think you're motivated by status and growing at this organization. And I want to show you 2 or 3 ways that really came to the forefront. And then I don't want to say you address people or you confront people, but I do think effective management is about pushing your people to get past the surface area of, what are my greatest weaknesses? My greatest weakness is I try too hard. Like, yes, everybody might say that, but I think there's a certain point where you have to try to get below the surface and say to somebody, here's what I'm seeing. Talk me out of this perspective. Tell me why this isn't how you feel.
So I think one of the things you can do is to look at what they try and accomplish in planning and where they see as the vision. I tend to be more competitive. And so a lot of the business plans and structures that I'll set up are about becoming the number one whatever in the industry, or beating the benchmark of this, or it's all about winning in some way, however I'll define that quarter or that year. I was doing some business planning with somebody the other day, and their goal was, and it wasn't particularly quantitative, was to be the best place to work in the area. I was like, okay. Well, that's really different. So they wanted everybody happy. They wanted people to enjoy their jobs, which is praiseworthy. But I think when you start looking at how people craft their vision, that can tell you a lot about what motivates them. Is it numeric? Is it winning? Is it relational? What is the core behind these objectives trying to accomplish?
Yeah, we've had an interesting journey as an organization. So I joined my current company 7 years ago. And at the time, we were a 6 or 7 person company, entirely based in Austin, working with some very large companies, but still relatively in kind of startup mode. And over the last 7 years, we've grown to be about a 35, 40 person company with about 100 contractors around the world that work with us. And we've meaningfully grown our impact, or the amount of clients that we touch. And in all truthfulness, we've struggled a little bit making the move from a 7 or 8 person company where everybody could be involved in every decision and your all hands meeting could happen on Friday around a conference room table, to a company that now has an office in London. We now have people all around the country. We're fully remote, and we have departments that are the same size as the whole company was 7 years ago. And so on the leadership team, we're struggling a little bit to figure out, how do we hopefully then make the next leap to a company that's 100 people or 200 people? And I think some of that is you really have to figure out what you stand for as an organization and the type of people that you want to be a part of the journey. 5 years ago, we were really looking for people that were, in essence, jack of all trades people, because we only had 9 people. We needed everybody to wear a lot of hats. Now we're looking for people who are much more specialized in their specific role. And that's been an adjustment that we as a company now, I think, are motivated by different things. And we're looking for people who are motivated by different things.
Yeah, that makes sense. The people who, the original motivation of the people on that team at the beginning, it's not going to serve where your team is now. And where your team is when it's 200 people, they're going to have to be motivated by something different. Is there any danger in subconsciously or consciously seeking out people who have your exact same motivations? Could it benefit you to have someone that's motivated by something different on purpose?
I think so. I mean, as we've hired individuals who are now managing people, whereas previously there were only 7 of us, and maybe 2 of us had a managerial role. Now we've got 7 people who are managing different individuals. What's important for us is we're now trying to build a bench of future leaders. So we need people on staff who are very interested in, how do we train? How do we develop? How do we actually think about what do we need to be a company that's 75 to 100 people? Where previously we were just we just got to do whatever we can to keep things going and growing. It was all about growth. Now it's about putting in place actual sustainable practices that will work when we're hopefully double in size. Again, it's been an interesting evolution for me. Every company that I've worked at has been smaller and smaller and smaller. I started at Deloitte, one of the largest professional services firms in the world. And then 10 years later, I was working for a company that had, 6 people. And it's been a really interesting evolution in me. I like it. I like working for a small company, and I'm motivated by having a seat at the table and actually having impact on the direction of the company. Some people aren't motivated by that. Some people want to be in a very stable cruise ship that doesn't move a lot, and they know that they are having an impact, but they're maybe having an impact on a very small part of a very large enterprise.
Can you recall a time when somebody was surprised when their true motivation came to light?
Yeah, one of our simulations that led to a lot of the work that I do on decision making is that simulation that I was talking about, where you're building a business from the ground up. And part of the way the game is structured is everybody starts on a brand new venture capital backed company. They get $7.5 million, and you're competing with the other people in the simulation to try to build a business from the ground up. And you play a role. So somebody's the CEO of the company, somebody's the VP of R&D, somebody's the VP of sales and marketing. And the game sends different pieces of information to each department at different points in the game. The game is timed, and you have to make decisions. So during one round of the game, you might get the opportunity to acquire a new company. But your VP of R&D gets an email touting all of the benefits of the acquisition, and your VP of operations gets an email and says, hey, I hear we're thinking about acquiring this company. I'm hearing rumblings that they're the subject of a government investigation for fraud. I don't think we should acquire this company. And your CEO gets an email and says, you have 5 minutes to make a decision. So meet with all of your team and try to figure it out. And what happens is, over the course of the game, you start to have people that really start to disagree. I got this piece of information. I think we should do it. And we've done this with some pretty high level corporate executives. You're talking VP, C-suite level leaders of Fortune 500, sometimes even Fortune 100 type of companies. And we had a leader once go through it who said, hand up, 2 years ago, I was a part of a company. It wasn't this company. And we had the opportunity to do an acquisition, and I flubbed the due diligence. I was advocating for something, and it was really the wrong direction for us to go. And I got so focused on we should grow our footprint, growth at all costs, that I didn't see the red flags. And so a lot of what we try to talk about in the simulation is, yes, there's time pressure. Yes, there's stress. But how do you take a big step back and say, okay, how do we make an effective decision? That's where a lot of the work that I've done on pre-mortems came in. How do you actually anticipate failure rather than, to the early point in the conversation, our kind of default behavior is to assume success, assume we're going to be successful. And we see that time and time again in the simulation. And that's why we've done so much work with pre-mortems.
I've done that before with groups, the pre-mortem, and, and we've all heard about doing a post-mortem after something, goes south. Let's all meet and talk about what went wrong and how we can change so that it doesn't happen again. And that's helpful. But I really found it helpful to do this exercise of, okay, we're about to go through this process. Let's imagine it fails dramatically. What caused that failure? And then identify those failures in advance.
It's amazing. Everybody always has a very quick answer. Like nobody's ever like, oh, I don't know, at least in my experience. So imagine this fails a year from now. We're sitting here talking about how bad it failed. Why did it fail? Nobody's like, oh, geez, I don't know. I can't imagine. Everyone always goes, oh, it'd be because of that. Yeah. But whoa. And we're moving him so quick.
Yeah, the interesting thing is when we do our simulation, if you walk around and you ask people, okay, you guys are making the decision to make this acquisition, or during one of the rounds of the simulation, your company has a social media campaign that is going viral for all the wrong reasons. And one person on your team wants to pull it, but your sales and marketing director gets an email and says, I know that we're having some problems with the social media campaign, but it's leading to huge sales growth in a key market for us. So you as a leadership team need to fight about, should we pull the social media campaign or should we leave it? And what I've found in the simulation, when we walk around and teams have to make a decision, teams can usually come up with 6 or 7 reasons why something they're about to do is a good idea. They usually, although they can come up with a bad idea or why something will fail, their usual default behavior is to assume the decision they're going to make is going to be successful. And so we actually try to force people to conduct a pre-mortem, not because we want them to change the decision that they were going to make. You don't always change the decision. But what you do is you start to put in place like a mitigation plan. If this thing goes wrong, here's why we think it will go wrong. And here's the 4 things we can do to prevent that when we start to see it going wrong.
You gave an example. We talked briefly at a Future Proof conference back in September, I think, over in Huntington Beach. You gave an example of this I thought was great about the Cobras.
Yeah.
Story.
During the era of colonialization in India, the British government was concerned about the number of venomous cobra snakes in Delhi, city in India. So what the government does is they come up with this plan and they say, we are going to offer a bounty for every dead cobra. So citizens, we have a cobra problem. You bring us dead cobras, we will pay you a bounty. And initially, this is like a wonderful idea. Ton of dead snakes. Problem gets a little bit better. The problem is entrepreneurial individuals started to breed cobra snakes because now the government would pay them for every dead snake. And very quickly, the government becomes aware of this. And so they have to turn around on their promise. They have to cut the bounty program. Well, the problem then is all of these entrepreneurial snake breeders now just set their now worthless snakes free. And so the problem is actually worse at the end than it was at the beginning. In essence, the apparent solution for the problem made the situation even worse. And my example when I give keynote talks is usually like at some level, a pre-mortem would have helped this. You could have foreseen some of the problems that might have transpired.
Yeah, I think that's a good tool to use. What other tools have you found helpful? Obviously, looking at doing a pre-mortem, what other tools have you found helpful in improving effective decision making?
When I was asked to speak at the TEDx conference in Dallas, our team kind of went through these tens of thousands of people who have gone through the simulation. We talked to a lot of our facilitators and we said, what would a 3-step decision-making process look like? And the second step was embrace a pre-mortem. The first step was what we called challenge the constraints. And the way that we describe it is we find that in our simulation, when we present a challenge to a team or to an individual, we all have this unbelievable passion of solving. Like we get a challenge and we just want to jump in and solve it. And usually that comes at the expense of taking a step back and challenging the constraints. So I give an example from the stage about this class on entrepreneurship at Stanford University. And the professor for the class did this project with her students. And what she did was she gave every group an envelope. And they open the envelope and there's $5 in the envelope. There's a $5 bill. And the teacher says, okay, this is a class on entrepreneurship. You have one job. Your job over the next couple of weeks is to take this $5 and turn it into the most money possible. That is your only job. And all you have to do is at the end of the experience, every team is going to get back on stage and they're going to tell everybody else what they did and how much money they generated. So when I give this talk, everybody usually starts thinking in their head, what did these entrepreneurial students do at Stanford? And what the heck would I do if I was given a $5 envelope and told to just turn it into as much money as possible? And what's amazing is the winning team at Stanford didn't even use the $5. The $5 stayed in the envelope. In essence, that was a constraint. What they did is they went around to towns or companies in the town of Stanford around the university and said, we have this opportunity to present to a group of brilliant Stanford students. What would you pay us for the right to just take over our presentation? And that's what the winning team did. The winning team challenged the constraints of the exercise. They didn't use the $5 to buy anything. Instead, they used the real asset that they had, which was the presentation to a bunch of entrepreneur students at Stanford. And I love that example because I think the only way that's possible is to challenge the constraints of the exercise. And way too many times when we do our simulations, people just jump in and solve the problem. They don't take a step back and think, what's actually holding me back from making a true breakthrough?
It seems like being able to take a step back and look at the bigger picture is the key in avoiding a bad decision. Because, in real life, but even more so maybe in these simulations, is there's time constraints and there's stress and we're ramping up your heart rate and your anxiety. Okay, well, if all of that's coming at you, all of these stressors, you're going to probably make worse decisions. So if you step back, it's even more important. Well, what can people do outside of those high stress moments to build the habit of being able to step back when they're in a high stress moment?
What we found in our company, we did a really poor job of note taking. And I know that's a really weird example, but when we were a young, fast growing company, we were moving so fast that we weren't taking notes. We weren't actually saying, hey, this is what we agreed to. This is the plan that we're going to put in place. And this is how we're going to check to actually see that we're making progress a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now.
Yeah.
And as weird as it sounds, our weekly meetings now that actually have an agenda, and when a decision gets made, it gets put in the weekly document that we can then refer back to, has been probably the biggest unlock that we've had as an organization. And I think sometimes when you're moving so fast and there's so much stress, like taking the extra minute, the extra 5 minutes, the extra 10 minutes to actually write it down and say, oh man, we are actually going to come back to this 2 weeks later and say, was our thesis correct? Was our assumption correct? Was our plan actually the right path to go forward? So that has been a huge unlock. Although it's a really small thing, it has been a huge unlock for us as an organization.
I love that, because a lot of times like the biggest levers we can pull are not the most complicated. They're the simplest. And just because they're simple does not mean they're easy. Like that's so simple. That is not easy though. Sometimes the simplicity makes it more difficult because it's so tempting to be like, that's nothing. Like, that's, we don't need to waste our time with that. But what I've found similarly is that I'll very easily forget the purpose of a decision. I might not forget the decision, but I'm very likely to forget the purpose of the decision. And so by writing the purpose of the decision, I'll so many times I'll talk to an employee, they'll say like, hey, can you sign off on this? The project you told me to start 2 months ago, whatever. I go, why the hell did I tell you to do that? I told you to do that? They're like, yeah. I go, why did I tell you to do that? And they used to not have an answer. They're like, I don't know. You told me to do this. No, this is horrible. I hate it. And well, they've just wasted 2 months of time because I can't remember why I told them to do it. And now they go, we actually have it written down. Here you go. Boom. Purpose, desired outcome, everything that you wanted. Here is your vision. I go, oh, what a great idea. And then it actually works.
a big unlock for me at Deloitte was I started to get really good at coming out of a meeting and sending an email that said, here's what we decided on. And I don't know who told me to do that, but it was an unbelievable unlock for me. It's like, to my point earlier, you kind of have the receipts. You say, hey, you told me to do this. You said you wanted it done by this date. And here were the 3 things you said were the most important. I think that's where young professionals sometimes get it wrong. They need that level of, hey, this is what we decided on. This is what we discussed. This is what I'm going to do. And then you got to hold yourself accountable, but then at least you do have the receipts.
Oh, that's for sure. I started having my assistant years ago write down, and she was in our meetings. I said, I want you to write down the decisions that are made in this meeting. Just document them, memorialize them, because what I was finding is that as time would go by, people would forget what we decided. They'd come back and go, no, we didn't do it. No,
we didn't decide to do that. We were just brainstorming.
Yeah, I thought we were.
No, we were just brainstorming. That has worked for me every time I've done it, except one time, and it failed really bad, is we decided to fire somebody. And so I sent the email, and I accidentally included the person we were talking about. At midnight, by the way, at midnight on a Thursday.
I remember that.
Not a good one.
If you use Gmail or Outlook, one of the best features is they all have a delay send button.
Yeah, this
they all
was
have
before that.
Yeah, so make sure to turn that on.
Yeah, and I learned on that day you cannot unsend. You can unsend, but not if they've read the email. And so that's when I found out at midnight that he had read the email.
I remember that. That was horrible.
Oh, well, it was pretty bad.
You know, Sanger, you were talking about in decision making, there is a personality type, quick start from Colby, that tends to make decisions more quickly. They will embrace uncertainty. They're not terrified by it. And so what I have found is that for people with that personality type who tend to be fairly innovative, tend to be sort of attracted to the new things, is that if you set up a structure where you just wait, they say, hey, let's do that. Just circle back in a couple of days. Go, you still may.
They lost interest. Yeah.
They're like, nah, now that I think about it, no, don't do that.
No, now that we're away from the idea and into the work zone of this idea, I don't want to do it. Yeah, no, that helps me a lot. My tendency is to come up with new ideas. So what I used to do is like get back from a conference and it's like, all right, 8 a.m., the day after the conference.
We're changing everything.
We are changing everything. And now I'm like, I'm going to force myself to wait a week. Like there's nothing that's so urgent that I have to implement it this week that I'm going to have learned at this conference. So wait a week. Half of the crap I wrote down, I'm like, that is so not... I'm 10 years away from needing to do that, or something.
I would say another thing that we've employed, and I'll give my colleague in our operations department credit, is we try our best to hold to on our meetings. You have to put an agenda forward, and you have to say if the topic is an informed topic, like you're just informing people, you don't want feedback, you're not doing anything, you're just telling people something that they need to know. Whether it's a discussed topic, whether you want discussion and you're carving out time in the agenda for discussion, whether it's a decide topic, like you're going to discuss, but then you've got to make a decision, or it's a banter topic where there doesn't really need to be a decision and we just need to banter about it. And the goal there is we try to set up an agenda where we know that the decide things are going to either come early in the meeting or there's going to be enough time for them. Because what we found, and I don't know, other companies probably run into this, we love to talk. Like we love to discuss, we love to banter, we love to debate. And it was really helpful for us to say on a weekly cadence, like these are the things we actually have to decide. And these are the things that we can just banter about for 10 minutes and actually carve out the time for that has been incredibly helpful for us.
Yeah. What does that sound like when y'all are having those conversations?
I think we've done a really good job of realizing some of the things that are more, this isn't a democracy, like somebody is just going to decide, our CEO is just going to decide. And there are some things that, we hopefully get to unanimous approval of something, and trying to put that out and say, here's a decision we need to make 3 months from now. So we are carving out time in this week's meeting to banter about it, and we are putting a decision point 2.5 months from now. we need to make a decision. The hope is maybe we can make a decision and it can be unanimous. But if 2.5 months later, after reviewing all the reports and having all the discussions and doing all the debating, we haven't come to anything, somebody's got to be the final decision maker. So in an ideal world, you would put that out. You would say, what's the decision date? What's the actual point of no return where you have to make a decision? And assume you can't come to universal consensus. Who's the final decision maker who basically has veto power of saying, this is what we're doing. I've heard all the arguments and we're not at unanimous consent. And here's what we're going to do.
Yeah, deciding that before starting is probably huge. Well, anytime I've tried to have some version of that conversation after the ball's already rolling, I realize everybody's pulling the brakes.
Nobody wants to be responsible.
Nobody wants to say, okay, fine, I'll make the decision. Or, if it's conflicted, nobody agrees. Nobody wants to raise their hand. And except your most, disagreeable person, is they're willing to say, I'll take the hit for, not having everyone on the same page. But that doesn't mean that person's in the best position to make a decision. They're just most comfortable with people being mad at them.
Do you find in team decision-making structures like this, like what you're talking about, that as people naturally will have different decision-making styles, that can really slow the process when the process shouldn't be slowed? Some people say, hey, here's the information, let's make a decision. Some people want to be more thoughtful or feel like they need more information or want to wait. And they're never going to make a decision because that's just how they are. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, what you made me think of right there is one of our simulations is really focused on decision making, but you don't need data. A lot of it is cross-functional collaboration. There is some data. We find that people in that simulation, there are some people who feel very comfortable with that. There are some people who, even though we tell you don't need a spreadsheet, you don't need data, they have to put it in a spreadsheet. They don't feel comfortable that they can make a decision unless they are looking at numbers in a spreadsheet and that is telling them which way to go. And I think what's powerful about the simulation, and one of the reasons why kind of our tagline for so long has been real world practice without real world consequences, is we tell you at the onset, one of the things that we want you to do is we want you to be comfortable with failure. If you have always wondered if you could be the type of leader who relies on data and delineation and deliberation, and previously you've always been the type of leader who just goes by your gut and makes the decision that's the first thing that comes to your mind, try to be that other leader and see how it feels. A lot of the times we talk about that in the managerial simulation too. It's like, be the type of manager that you would love to be, but you are petrified to be because you don't want to deviate from what has gotten you to this point. If you've managed people your whole career and it's gone relatively well for you, it is petrifying to be a different type of manager. A simulated environment, a training environment, is the perfect opportunity to stretch your comfortable limits, to try a different way of managing without people's actual career in your hand. I think that's what's so scary, especially for seasoned people who've been in the corporate world for a long time. They don't want to change. And really, why should they? They've been successful up until this point, but there very well may be things that they could really up-level their leadership if they push themselves a little bit to try something new.
What's the craziest thing someone's tried?
That's a great question. We have generative AI in the simulation now where you have to communicate with one of the characters. And our product team has built about 30 pages of prompts to give these characters life. So in the past, it was much more of a dynamic where our algorithm would send certain things to you at different times. Now, a chat window pops up and you're in a performance review conversation. And we don't know what the character is going to say back to you. We know what the prompts have put guardrails on, and we know where we want you to get. But during one of the experiences, one of your people that you manage is taking credit for somebody else's work. And you need to have a performance review conversation with them. And we've had people, like entrepreneurial folks, have tried to just break the generative AI component of it, where they try to ask, like, what is your algorithm? What is prompting you to say this? They've tried to not approach it as a performance review conversation. They've tried to uncover what's behind the algorithm. And so I think that's the craziest thing that people have done. My general sense is I was never somebody who was involved in learning and development or in like an HR, more human resource context. What surprised me and maybe given me some confidence in the future of humanity or the future of corporate leaders is actually, I think people are more open to training and development that you would innately think that they are. I think people are actually looking to level up their skills. And as much as my belief and the work and the research that we've done has shown that people are pretty confident in their abilities, they're actually confident in their abilities, but they're willing to learn and they're willing to try to be better. And that's given me a lot of hope when we work with leaders.
Yeah, you just need a safe environment to do it.
Yeah.
Competition day is not the time for me to try out a new jiu-jitsu move. And probably training with the toughest training partner in the room is not my time to try it out. I need to try it out against someone that I'm pretty confident I'm better than. And then I can work it up. So I'm gonna go against someone who can't hurt me in an environment where I can't get hurt. And then increase the difficulty. And if people never have an opportunity to try out a leadership skill in an environment where they can't get hurt, then they're not going to try any new skills. They're not going to try to learn anything. That makes all the sense in the world. What's been like the worst performance you've ever seen? Someone that just, oh my gosh, that was you made all the wrong leadership decisions in the simulation.
And use their names, please.
Yeah, where do they work?
One of our favorite clients is the University of Texas. So we're based here in Austin, and we have been the kickoff simulation for the full-time MBA program at McCombs, the business school at Texas, for probably 12 or 13 years now. We've been doing it for a long time. So you can imagine that 300 or so MBA students on their third or fourth day on campus thrust into a business simulation where you tell them that they're going to be competing with the other business school students. There is a lot of bravado in that room. There is a lot of pumping of the chest. I am the greatest business mind since Steve Jobs, and I am going to wipe the floor with everybody. We have found that students who walk in very confident are usually the ones that get hit on their ass the fastest. Those that don't try to build consensus, those that don't spend, I always like to say, what makes people successful in the simulation? I've facilitated this in 17 countries around the world. What makes people successful, at least when I watch people, it's usually people who do a little bit less talking at the beginning. It's usually people who listen a little bit more and are less talkative at the beginning and try to figure the game out and figure their teammates out that tend to be more successful over time. The bravado, I know everything, part of the game is built around we're not going to tell you all of the answers at the onset. And there's going to be some challenges and some curveballs around every bend, just like there is in the real world. And so people who take a little bit more of a wait and see approach, you speak up and you make your case when you feel very confident. But by the very nature of this being a simulation that is nothing like your real world, you really can't be confident at the onset of the game. And so people who tend to be unbelievably confident and try to kind of muscle their way into every decision being the one that they want to make tend to struggle in the simulation as the rounds progress.
My guess is that when you look at something like that, the answers right and wrong may not be concrete. There may be areas of gray, but what you're trying to look at is, are they utilizing a framework of quality decision making? How are you gauging success moving forward, sort of beyond that, after you've coached people on better decision making? What types of things do you go back and look at to see if they're doing?
Yeah, twofold. So one thing that you hit on that's abundantly clear and also really important is all of our games are dynamically competitive. And what I mean by that is you are not just competing against the computer, you are competing against other people in your cohort. And so what makes people successful is you very well might have a very good strategy. In one of our simulations, you have to really focus on a market. There are 3 markets that you can sell your product into. You could have a perfect strategy of a low cost approach to attack M2, which is one of the markets that's super cost conscious. If every other team in the game is attacking M2 and you start to see that in the reports, your strategy will not be successful because the market will just become there will be so much competition in that market that if you're not able to deviate and you're not able to adjust or pivot your approach, you won't be successful. So one of the things that we teach is it's not just about having a plan, it's being malleable and being able to adjust your plan if you see the market turning against you. To your other question about how do we actually show that people are having success with this beyond? We have the pleasure of working with some clients who will actually anonymously open up the people who go through our simulation versus a test group or a control group who doesn't go through the simulation, and ask people to give 360 feedback to the leaders that go through the simulation and the leaders who don't go through the simulation. And what we found time and time again is people's management scores, or how the people on their team actually rate them, tends to go up after they go through a simulation. And I think we're good at what we do, but I think it's more about putting you in an introspective position where you actually then have to go talk to a person in the real world, and in the back of your head be thinking, how does this person relate to one of the fictitious characters that I interacted with in the simulation? And what do I struggle with? What did I struggle with in the simulation? And maybe I need to do something different with my real life Jim in the real world. And that's where some of the characters and some of the development and some of the introspection, just having the opportunity to practice, I think is a huge advantage for leaders.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, when you look at assessing that, are there key steps in the framework that somebody could observe from the outside and go, aha, this person is doing X, Y, and Z, and that gives them a leg up on quality decision making?
One thing that some clients have done, at least at the higher levels of organizations where people might work with executive coaches, they might have a third party that is actually working with them on a coaching. A lot of those clients will actually invite the executive coaches to observe the simulation experience. So they actually watch people in a simulated environment, and then they use that as a coaching tool for the real world. So they might say, hey, 3 weeks ago, you were talking to me as your executive coach about this challenge. I noticed in the simulation, you ran right up against somebody else and really tried to bulldoze your way through. And that's what we've been talking a lot about in the coaching that we've been doing. And so having that outside person, whether it's our facilitator, whether it's an executive coach, the other thing that we do is we try to do a lot of reflective activities, a lot of like writing and actually talking through how did you feel in this moment of peak stress. And I think what people find is the actual act of writing that down and talking about it tends to expose them to things they might not be realizing that they're doing. And I think that's a really helpful tool.
When did the technology turn the corner and allow you guys to even build this? Because it seems like, unless you have AI, machine learning, like just completely top notch, it's going to be really tough. You're basically, 20 years ago, you wanted to do something like this, you're left with multiple choice answers and how to respond. It's not going to work.
Yeah. The company was built out of a traditional e-learning company, and e-learning, for those that aren't familiar, that's you click through a training. Literally you see a slide on the screen, you read something, you answer an ABC question, you click through it. The simulations were built to be a little bit more of an immersive experience, where it was built to be the best analogy that we give to people when they're trying to understand what our product is did you ever play SimCity? Were you familiar with the game SimCity? And if you're not, in SimCity, you're the mayor of a fictitious town, and you get to decide where the roads go. You get to decide where the police station goes, and you get feedback from your population, your citizens in the game. A lot of our games are kind of built around the same idea. Here's a blank canvas. You need to build a managerial strategy. You need to manage these individuals. We have a game that's built around financial acumen. You might not know what a balance sheet is, an income statement, cash flow, P&L, all of that. We have a game where you actually become the CFO of a fake company, and you need to make all of those decisions. The core principle is, how do you use the technology that was available to us in about 8 to 10 years ago is when the simulations business really started to take off. The generative AI stuff has been about 18 months. We started using ChatGPT and other large language models in some of our simulations about 16 to 18 months ago.
Yeah, that's such a positive shift for learning more broadly, because the traditional e-learning model, like, you can kind of fake it. You kind of just skim through it and start to recognize patterns. Oh, the answer's probably, and You didn't really learn. You just learned the pattern of how to pass the quiz at the end of the chapter or whatever. But you can't, I imagine that's not possible at all with the simulation. You can't learn the pattern.
Yeah. And I mean, my core belief and why I joined the company 7 years ago is I don't think you can learn anything if you're not engaged. Like, learner engagement is key. I don't care how good the quality of the content is. I don't care how bad the quality of the content is. If you're not engaged in the process, you can't learn anything. And our core thesis is, if you have teammates depending on you, if you have a clock ticking down telling you that you only have 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 12 minutes left to make your decisions, and there's a scoreboard component, all of our games have a competitive component, it is impossible for you to disengage, or basically entirely impossible, almost impossible for you to disengage. And at that core belief, we think we have a leg up on most of the competition when it comes to training, because most of the times you can disengage when you're in a training. You can just click through, see the patterns or whatever.
What do you find is the triggering event that causes somebody to recognize they're not good at decision making? Do people just come to that on their own, or have you seen situations where people have just made horrible choices and they're like, oh, we got to fix, they've hit rock bottom. They're the alcoholic sleeping on the sidewalk. They're like, I got to fix this.
I mean, one of our core theses as a company is it's usually the teams that come in second to last place and last place that learn the most. I do think there's something to be said where when you're thrust into an environment that doesn't feel like your real world, you go up against people who are relatively, most of our trainings, it's people at your level. So it's all vice presidents from a global telecommunications company, and they're competing in our simulation. One of the things that's great is if your team comes in last place or you struggle, I think you end up learning a lot more than if you're just successful. Now, if you're successful, I think you can learn a lot from that too, because maybe you're successful because you deviated from your default behavior. And that was a really good thing for you to learn. But it tends to be people who really struggle, people who've dropped the ball, people who miss an important email in the game, or they really struggle managing one of the characters in the game. I think those folks actually learn more than the people who are successful at the simulation.
What is your top decision-making tip for business owners?
I think that the pre-mortem is underused. I really believe that when we as a company tried to grow, we found 17 ways that we thought every strategic decision we were making was going to be successful. We actually really had to push ourselves to say, why is this going to be a failure? I think we now do that a lot better. Getting a bunch of people in the room who have a stake in a decision and saying, okay, this is going to be an unmitigated failure. We hope it's not going to be, but why is it going to be an unmitigated failure? Let's actually think about the reasons this is going to fail miserably. We all think we're brilliant. We think we're going to be successful. We wouldn't be doing this otherwise. Let's spend 30 minutes. Let's spend an hour. Let's spend 2 hours thinking about the 6 or 7 main reasons, and let's rank them why we're going to fail. I think the pre-mortem is without a doubt the best tip I can give.
Thanks for being here, Matt. Where can people connect with you and with Ability?
Yeah, so I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. So Matthew Confer there, based in the Austin, Texas area. Ability is spelled Abilitie. So it's Ability, but spelled a little funky. You can reach
French.
out. Yeah, exactly. You can see a demo of our simulations. You can reach out to me. I'd be happy to set that up. And then if you wanted to check out my TEDx talk, it's called Before You Decide. And you can just Google that and find it.
Hey, thanks for being here, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
My takeaway from talking to Matt, it's not particularly obvious from the discussion, but it was sort of what I internalized. And that is, there's two things you have to dig deeper on if you're looking at making good decisions in a team environment where you're leading. And the first is understanding what your instinctual behavior or your instinctual decision-making process is. And so how do I tend to do things? But then also looking at what are the motivations of my team? So how can I best motivate them? Are they motivated by free time or prestige or recognition or money? What is it, so that I can lead them better and ultimately get better decisions because they'll be more fully engaged?
It's a good reminder to do the pre-mortem. I've been doing it but I would need to maybe do it a little bit more and not forget that it's important, since that was his biggest thing. And then also being self-aware in the sense of knowing, how are my communications interpreted by others? So when I say something, how does it come across? I don't maybe consider that as often as I could.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram at decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Sean's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.